Hey Alex, if you see like Jesse or whatever, can you tell them when, in case I get stuck back here, when they... Hey, he does have to come up to the podium so we can do a thing, you know. Brandon, so we can go through this. Okay. Hello? Hey, if everybody is set with audio and video, we'll do a quick run through. Hey, can we do a run through, Alex? Do you care? Okay. Okay, so on the earpieces on the seats, channel 1 is English and channel 2 is German. Are you guys all set on the main riser? And does everyone have audio? How do we get? Okay. So cuts riser. Can you grab him real quick? So are you okay? Are you okay audio-wise? So we have three mults. Hello. Actually, give me 15 seconds. Hey, please throw up German translation in the booth
1, 2,
for 20
4,
seconds.
5, 6, 7, 8. This is German. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't speak German, but I'm speaking on the German language. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So 3.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
All right, so we have 3 mults. Again, the receivers on the seats are 1 for English, 2 for German. The mults on the risers, 1 mult is program, which means that it's not translated. It is just live. So no translation, nothing, just live. Whatever is happening is going to the mult. The other mult will be English only, which will be always translated into English. If President Obama is speaking, nothing will happen on that mult. It will be bypassed. If you are using the German-only malt, then when President Obama is speaking, it will be translated into German. When Chancellor Merkel is speaking, it will be a pass-through. Nothing will happen. If anyone has any questions, please go to the back corner of the room or tell me. If anyone has an audio problem, now would be the time. We could help you fix it. I have no responses. How do we make the audio so how are they getting audio? Okay. I didn't know they were going that far.
Who cares?
So, okay, well, I'll do one more shout out here. Oh, actually, let's do a run through. Let's do a quick run through. Okay, Alex? Give me a second. Hey, let's do a quick run through. Yeah. All right, let's do a quick run through. Okay, we're going to do a quick run through on the podium. So this is President Obama's podium. When he's speaking, it will go to the floor or program malt with nothing happening to it.
This is German interpretation.
The English malt, nothing will happen to it, and the German malt will have German translation.
I am speaking German. 1, 2.
So that's what's happening right now. I'm speaking at President Obama's podium.
4, 5, 6.
And if you are in the English malt
German is being
booth,
spoken
you guys good?
through the interpretation.
So you should be
1, 2,
hearing
3, 4,
me
5,
only,
6.
no translation.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Or a
6.
pass-through.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So now we will
6.
then switch over to Chancellor Merkel's podium.
Check, check.
I'm now
1,
speaking
2.
English.
Angela
I'm
Merkel's
speaking English.
podium. If you're hearing this,
Interpretation.
you'll be on the
speaking
German malt.
English.
If you're on an English
1, 2,
malt, you'll
3,
hear
4, 5,
translation
6.
into English.
I am on the
Check.
English
1, 2,
only
3, 4,
malt.
5,
I'm speaking
6,
English
7,
on the
8,
interpretation
9,
booth.
10.
1,
You
2,
should
3,
be
4,
hearing
5,
an
6,
English
7, 8.
translation.
1,
Check.
2,
1, 2,
5,
3,
6,
4,
7,
5,
8.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
6, 7, 8. Check 1, 2.
Is there anyone having audio problems at this time? Anyone?
Hey, give us a moment. We'll come around.
I can't find them.
Oh, well, there might not be one there. 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Announce mic check 1 2 3. 1 2 1 2. Just want to check one more time if anyone needs audio and they're not getting it. And as a reminder, we'd like to ask everyone to silence all cell phones, all electronic devices. Please silence them. Thank you. One last time, everyone okay with the translation and the audio?
They want to do another.
All right, we're going to do another quick test. So right now, as I speak at President Obama's podium, you get an English pass-through, as in just my
I'm
voice.
speaking German through the German
You should just be hearing me,
booth.
nothing else.
1 2 3
When
4 5
Chancellor
6.
Merkel begins to speak,
I'm speaking
you will
German.
then hear the English
1 2
translation.
3 4. I am speaking German. I am now speaking English.
You will hear the
on
English translation now.
1 2 3 4 5 6. I am speaking English, English, English. 1 2. I do not hear Merkel's microphone. 1 2 3 4 5 6. I don't hear you at all.
Yeah. Give it a second.
Okay. I'm not hearing him. I'm not hearing Merkel. Okay.
Okay, I'm speaking at President Obama's podium. And on the German-only mult, you will hear a German translation. On the program mult, you will hear just my voice. And on the English mult, you will hear just my voice. Okay, Brandon's there.
Check, check. 1 2. Angela Merkel's podium. On the English-only molt, you should hear an English translation.
English, 1 2 3
On the
4
German
5
molt, you'll just
6.
hear
I
my
am speaking
voice,
English. 1
as a
2
pass-through.
3 4
Check, check.
5
1
6.
2 3
Check.
4 5
1
6
2
7
3 4
8
5
9
6
10.
7 8
Once
9
again, on
10.
the English molt, you'll hear
I'm speaking
an
English. 1 2
translation.
1 2 1
And
2.
on the German
3
molt,
4
you should hear
5
just straight
6 7
pass-through.
8.
Program mode also. Just a
pass
straight
through.
pass-through.
This is not the pass-through. This is the English
Check,
interpretation
check. 1, 2.
on the English molt. 1, 2, English only. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Check 1, 2, POTUS podium. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. On this channel, you will hear, okay? German. Check 1, 2,
3, 4,
5,
English,
6,
English.
7,
1,
8,
2,
9,
3,
10.
4, 5,
Check
6.
1,
English,
2,
English.
3, 4, 5,
I'm speaking
6,
English.
7, 8,
1,
9,
2,
10.
3, 4. English, English. 1, 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your 2-minute warning. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Good morning, everybody. Please be seated. As always, it is a great pleasure to welcome my close friend and partner, Chancellor Angela Merkel, back to the White House. Angela, of course, has been here many times, but this visit is a chance for me to congratulate her on 2 achievements. Well into her 3rd term, Angela is now one of Germany's longest-serving chancellors. Perhaps more importantly, this is my first opportunity to publicly congratulate Angela and Germany on their 4th World Cup title. As we all saw in Rio, Angela is one of her team's biggest fans. Our U.S. team, however, gets better each World Cup, so watch out in 2018. Germany is one of our strongest allies, so whenever we meet, it's an opportunity to coordinate closely on a whole range of issues critical to our shared security and prosperity. As Angela and our German friends prepare to host the G7 this spring, it's also important for us to be able to coordinate on a set of shared goals. And at our working lunch this afternoon, we'll focus on what we can do to keep the economy growing and creating jobs. As strong supporters of the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, we agree that there needs to be meaningful progress this year toward an agreement that boosts our economies with strong protections for consumers and workers and the environment. I look forward to hearing Angela's assessment of how Europe and the IMF can work with the new Greek government to find a way that returns Greece to sustainable growth within the Eurozone, where growth is critical to both the United States and the global economy. And we'll be discussing our work to get all major economies to take ambitious action on climate change, including our initiative to limit public financing for coal-fired power plants overseas, and our global efforts to phase down some of the most dangerous greenhouse gases. Our discussion this morning focused on global security issues. We reaffirmed our commitment to training Afghan security forces and supporting a sovereign, secure, and united Afghanistan. We agree that the international community has to continue enforcing existing sanctions as part of our diplomatic effort to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, even as the P5+1 works closely together to do everything we can to try to achieve a good, verifiable deal. 2 issues in particular that dominated our workday this morning, Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the international fight against ISIL. With regard to Russia and the separatists it supports in Ukraine, it's clear that they've violated just about every commitment they made in the Minsk agreement. Instead of withdrawing from eastern Ukraine, Russian forces continue to operate there, training separatists and helping to coordinate attacks. Instead of withdrawing its arms, Russia has sent in more tanks and armored personnel carriers and heavy artillery. With Russian support, the separatists have seized more territory and shelled civilian areas, destroyed villages, and driven more Ukrainians from their homes. These are the facts. But Russian aggression has only reinforced the unity of the United States and Germany and our allies and partners around the world. And I want to thank Angela for her strong leadership and partnership as we've met this challenge. Chancellor Merkel and Vice President Biden met with Ukrainian President Poroshenko in Munich over the weekend, and Angela also shared with me the results of her talks in Moscow. We continue to encourage a diplomatic resolution to this issue, and as diplomatic efforts continue this week, we are in absolute agreement that the 21st century cannot stand idle, have us stand idle and simply allow the borders of Europe to be redrawn at the barrel of a gun. So today we've agreed to move forward with our strategy. Along with our NATO allies, we'll keep bolstering our presence in Central and Eastern Europe, part of our unwavering Article 5 obligation to our collective defense. We will continue to work with the IMF and other partners to provide Ukraine with critical financial support as it pursues economic and anti-corruption reforms. We discussed the issue of how best to assist Ukraine as it defends itself, and we agreed that sanctions on Russia need to remain fully in force until Russia complies fully with its obligations. Even as we continue to work for a diplomatic solution, we are making it clear again today that if Russia continues on its current course, which is ruining the Russian economy and hurting the Russian people, as well as having such a terrible effect on Ukraine, Russia's isolation will only worsen both politically and economically. With regard to ISIL, Germany and the United States remain united in our determination to destroy this barbaric organization. I thanked Angela for her strong support as a member of the international coalition that is working in Iraq. In a significant milestone in its foreign policy, Germany has taken the important step of equipping Kurdish forces in Iraq, and Germany is preparing to lead the training mission of local forces in Erbil. Germany is a close partner in combating the threat of foreign terrorist fighters, which was the focus of a special session of the UN Security Council that I chaired last fall. And under Angela's leadership, Germany is moving ahead with new legislation to prevent fighters from traveling to and from Syria and Iraq. At the same time, both Angela and I recognize that young people in both our countries, especially in Muslim communities, are being threatened and targeted for recruitment by terrorists like al-Qaeda and ISIL. And protecting our young people from this hateful ideology so that they're not vulnerable to such recruitment is first and foremost a task for local communities, families, neighbors, faith leaders who know their communities best. But we can help these communities, starting with the tone and the example that we set in our own countries. So I want to commend Angela for her leadership speaking out forcefully against xenophobia and prejudice, and on behalf of pluralism and diversity. She's made it clear that all religious communities have a place in Germany, just as they do here in the United States. And we're grateful that our German friends will be joining us at our summit next week on countering violent extremism, because this is a challenge our countries have to meet together. And let me end on a historic note. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. It marks the 25th anniversary of the reunification of Germany. So in a time when conflicts around the world sometimes seem intractable, when progress sometimes seems beyond grasp, Germany's story gives us hope. We can end wars, countries can rebuild, adversaries can become allies, walls can come down, divisions can be healed. Germany's story and the story of Angela's life remind us that when free people stand united, our interests and our values will ultimately prevail. And as we look to the future, as I prepare to visit Bavaria in June, I'm grateful for my partnership with Angela, as Americans are grateful for their partnership with the people of Germany. Chancellor Merkel.
Bundeskanzlerin Merkel.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, lieber Barack, ich freue mich heute.
Thank you, President. Dear Barack, I'm delighted to be back in Washington. 9 months ago, we were here for the last time, and this visit here has a lot to do with, first and foremost, the fact that we have assumed the presidency of the G7 presidency this year, and that we coordinate on these matters very closely, as we do on others, and obviously we will address issues related to the global economy when we meet in Bavaria on Schloss Elmau in the summer. From a European vantage point, I think we can say that we have made significant progress in a number of areas. We have countries who are now back on the growth path. Ireland comes to mind here in particular, but also Spain and Portugal. After a strong phase of structural reforms, they have now made significant progress. The new Commission, the new European Commission that has come in office, has launched a growth program in which Germany will participate. We will pin our hopes basically on growth and infrastructure, but also on other growth projects. For example, the digital economy. If I think of the state of the digital economy in the United States, there is a lot of things to be done by the Europeans now. I would say that a free trade agreement, the conclusion of a free trade agreement, for example, would also go a long way towards boosting growth. We know that you are very much engaged in the Asian Pacific area. There are a lot of free trade agreements there as well, and Germany will come out very forcefully in seeing that the negotiations between the EU and the United States on free trade agreements are pursued in a vigorous manner. It's in our own vested interest, in the interest of the United States, but also in the German interest. We are dealing basically on our G7 agenda with health issues. Let me just mention one. What sort of lessons have we drawn, for example, from the terrible Ebola epidemic? I think the one thing that we've learned is that the international organizations, the international community has to be quicker in reacting to such epidemics, and the G7 can give a very important contribution to doing this. And we're also interested, for example, in seeing Gavi be successful. We're delighted to be able to conclude the replenishment conference that has just been completed in Germany so successfully. Then we dealt with security issues this morning. It is true, Germany this year celebrates the 25th anniversary of its reunification. This would not have been possible, not have been achievable without our transatlantic partners, without the support of the United States of America, and we will always be grateful for this. And it is one case in point that it is well worth the effort to stand by one's values for decades, to pursue long-term goals and not relent in those efforts. After we thought in the 90s maybe that things would turn out somewhat more, we see ourselves confronted with a whole wealth of conflicts, and very complex ones as that. We worked together in Afghanistan. We talked about this as well. Germany has decided in its fight against IS to give help, to deliver training missions, to deliver also weapons if necessary. We work together on the Iran nuclear program, where we also enter into a crucial phase of negotiations. One particular priority was given to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia this morning. We stand up for the same principles of inviolability of territorial integrity. For somebody who comes from Europe, I can only say if we give up this principle of territorial integrity of countries, then we will not be able to maintain the peaceful order of Europe that we've been able to achieve. This is not just any old point. It's an essential, a crucial point, and we have to stand by it. And Russia has violated the territorial integrity of Ukraine in two respects, in Crimea and also in Donetsk and Luhansk. So we are called upon now to come up with solutions, but not in the sense of a mediator, but we also stand up for the interests of the European peaceful order. And this is what the French President and I have been trying to do over the past few days. We're going to continue those efforts, and I'm very grateful that throughout the Ukraine crisis, we have been in very, very close contact with the United States of America and Europe on sanctions, on diplomatic initiatives, and this is going to be continued. And I think that's indeed one of the most important messages we can send to Russia and need to send to Russia. We continue to pursue a diplomatic solution, although we have suffered a lot of setbacks. These days we will see whether all sides are ready and willing to come to a negotiated settlement. I've always said I don't see a military solution to this conflict, but we have to put all our efforts in bringing about a diplomatic solution. So there's a whole host of issues that we need to discuss. Over lunch, we will continue to talk about climate protection, about sustainable development and the sustainable development goals. So, yet again, thank you very much for the very close cooperation, very close coordination, and the possibility to have an exchange of views on all of these crucial issues. I think not only in hindsight can we safely say that the United States have always stood by us, have helped us to regain our unity in peace and freedom, but we can also say we continue to cooperate closely if it is about solving the conflicts of the world today. Unfortunately, there are many of them, and we will continue to do so in the future. Thank you for your hospitality.
First question, Steve Muffson, Washington Post.
Stress that U.S. and Europe need to have cohesion on the issue of sanctions and on dealing with Ukraine. And yet the administration is discussing sending lethal weapons to Ukraine, which is very different from what the Chancellor said over the weekend. So I was wondering whether this is a good cop, bad cop act, or is this a real reflection of difference of views and the situation on the ground? And more broadly, if there's no agreement this week, what lies ahead? Are we looking at a broader set of sanctions? What makes us think those set of sanctions will change the Russian president's mind any more than the current ones?
Well, let me start with a broader point. I think both Angela and I have emphasized that the prospect for a military solution to this problem has always been low. Russia obviously has an extraordinarily powerful military, and given the length of the Russian border with Ukraine, given the history between Russia and Ukraine, expecting that if Russia is determined that Ukraine can fully rebuff a Russian army has always been unlikely. But what we have said is that the international community working together can ratchet up the costs for the violation of the core principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that's exactly what we've done. And Russia has paid a significant cost for its actions, first in Crimea and now in eastern Ukraine. It has not yet dissuaded Mr. Putin from following the course that he is on. But it has created a measurable negative impact on the Russian economy, and that will continue. My hope is that through these diplomatic efforts, those costs have become high enough that Mr. Putin's preferred option is for a diplomatic resolution. And I won't prejudge whether or not they'll be successful. If they are successful, it will be in part because of the extraordinary patience and effort of Chancellor Merkel and her team. If they are not, then we will continue to raise those costs. And we will not relent in that. And one of the things I'm very encouraged about is the degree to which we've been able to maintain U.S.-European unity on this issue. Now, it is true that if, in fact, diplomacy fails, what I've asked my team to do is to look at all options. What other means can we put in place to change Mr. Putin's calculus. And the possibility of lethal defensive weapons is one of those options that's being examined. But I have not made a decision about that yet. I've consulted with not just Angela, but will be consulting with other allies about this issue. It's not based on the idea that Ukraine could defeat a Russian army that was determined. It is rather to see whether or not there are additional things we can do to help Ukraine bolster its defenses in the face of separatist aggression. But I want to emphasize that a decision has not yet been made. One of the bigger issues that we're also concerned with, though, is making sure that the Ukrainian economy is functioning and that President Poroshenko and Prime Minister Yatsenyuk can continue with the reform efforts that they've made. And I'm glad to see that because of our cooperation and our efforts, we're starting to see a package come together with the IMF, with the European Union and others that can help bolster the European economy so that they have the space to continue to execute some of the reforms and anti-corruption measures that they've made. One of the most important things we can do for Ukraine is help them succeed economically, because that's how people on the ground feel this change, this transformation inside of Ukraine. If that experiment fails, then the larger project of an independent Ukraine will fail. And so we're going to do everything we can to help bolster that. But there is no doubt that if, in fact, diplomacy fails this week, there's going to continue to be a strong, unified response between the United States and Europe. That's not going to change. There may be some areas where there are tactical disagreements. There may not be. But the broad principle that we have to stand up for not just Ukraine, but the principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty is one where we are completely unified.
Dafür stehen wir weiterhin ein.
Der französische Präsident und ich
The
haben
French
uns
President and
entschlossen,
I
nochmal
have decided
einen
to
Versuch zu unternehmen,
make one further
diplomatisch
attempt
voranzukommen.
to
Wir haben
make
das
progress
Minsker Abkommen, das Minsker
through
Abkommen ist nie
diplomatic means.
umgesetzt
We
worden.
have the
Im
Minsk
Gegenteil, die
Agreement. The
Situation
Minsk
hat
Agreement
sich
has never been
verschlechtert.
implemented.
Und,
Quite the contrary is
es
true.
wird
The
jetzt
situation
die
has actually
Möglichkeit
worsened
bestehen,
on the
zu
ground. So
versuchen,
now
hier
there is a
nochmal einen
possibility to
Waffenstillstand zu
try
erreichen
and bring
und
about a
auch,
ceasefire
Bedingungen,
and
unter
to
denen nicht jeden
also
Tag Menschen sterben
create
müssen, zivile
conditions
Opfer, andere Opfer.
that are
Und
then in
ich glaube,
place
es
where
ist
you
den
have not every
Versuch
day
wert und ich bin auch sehr
civilians
dankbar, dass wir
dying,
das in großer
civil victims
Gemeinsamkeit tun.
that fall
Ich
prey to this.
persönlich würde mir
And
jedenfalls
I'm
große Vorwürfe machen,
absolutely
wenn man es nicht
confident that we will
versucht hätte.
do this together. I
Dennoch
myself
ist
actually
der
would
Erfolg
not
alles
be able to
andere
live with
als
not
sicher.
having made this
Auch das
attempt.
muss ich
So
heute wieder
there is
sagen. Und deshalb
anything
ist
but
es auch
an
richtig,
assured success
dass,
in all of
wenn
this.
man
I have to
erkennen
be very
muss,
clear about
dass
this.
ein weiterer Erfolg und
But
auch einer mit einem
If
großen
at a certain point in time
Nachdruck
one has to
vorgetragener
say
Erfolg
that
nicht
a success
möglich ist,
is
dass
not
dann
possible,
Europa gemeinsam mit den
even if
Vereinigten
one puts
Staaten
every
von
effort
Amerika
into it, then
nach
the United
Möglichkeiten
States
sucht, wie wir
and
darauf
Europe have to
reagieren.
sit together and try and explore
Ich will nur darauf
further
hinweisen, dass die
possibilities
europäischen Außenminister schon letzte
what one
Woche
can do.
beschlossen haben, die
Just
Kommission
let me
wieder zu
point out here that
beauftragen,
foreign
über weitere
ministers of the
Sanktionen
European Union
nachzudenken.
last week already
Ich bin
tasked
bei
the
der
Commission to
Frage,
think about
was
further
wirkt und
possible
was nicht wirkt,
sanctions.
manchmal ein bisschen
On the
erstaunt.
issue
Ich
of
will mal an
what
das Beispiel
is
Iran
effective and what
denken.
not,
Dort
I'm
haben
somewhat
wir
surprised
über einen sehr langen
sometimes.
Zeitraum jetzt
Just
Sanktionen
just
und die werden eigentlich
let me
nicht in
mention
Frage gestellt. Und ich
Iran.
glaube, sie sind auch
For a
hilfreich
fairly
bei
long
dem
period of
jetzigen
time, we have had sanctions in
Verhandlungsprozess im
place there.
Zusammenhang mit dem
People don't seem to
Nuklearprogramm des
question them,
Iran.
and I think they
Und
have been
deshalb
fairly
ist es
successful
aus
if we
meiner
look at the
Sicht
current
richtig,
state of
dass wir
affairs,
die
what with the
Kosten
negotiations on the
für
nuclear
Russland
program.
eben auch immer
So
wieder
I think,
höher gesetzt
in
haben,
parallel, I think
weil
it was a very
wir
good thing
wirtschaftlich
to
sehr stark sind
put some
und weil
cost
wir auf
on
der anderen
to the
Seite,
Russians through these
sehen, dass
sanctions that
Russland
we
dadurch
agreed
auch
on,
beeinflusst wird
because
und
we see
deshalb
also that
die
Russia
100%
seems to be influenced by this. And this is why I am 100% behind these decisions. As to the export of arms, I have given you my opinion, but you may rest assured that no matter what we decide, the alliance between the United States and Europe will continue to stand, will continue to be solid, even though on certain issues we may not always agree. But this partnership, be it on Ukraine and Russia, be it on combating terrorism, terrorism on the international stage, be it on other issues, is a partnership that has stood the test of time, and that is, I mean, in Europe, we're very close, but this transatlantic partnership for Germany and for Europe is indispensable, and this will remain so, and I can say this also on behalf of my colleagues in the European Union.
Frau Dutz, ja, ich muss ja selber aufrufen.
Sorry, I have to call you myself, Frau Dutz. From DPA, the German Press Agency. President, you said that you have not yet made a decision as to whether weapons ought to be delivered to Ukraine. What would be your red line? What would be the red line that needs to be crossed for you to decide an armament of the Ukrainian army? And what do you think will this hold by way of a promise? Because the Chancellor said it will make matters worse. And what can the Nobel laureate Obama do more to defuse this conflict? And, Madam Chancellor, President Putin today demanded yet again that the government in Kiev negotiate directly with the separatists. When do you think the right moment has come to do this? And with looking at all of the big issues that you discussed, this breach of confidence due to the NSA affair of the U.S.-German relations, has that played a role today?
Do you want to go first on that?
Ich kann gerne beginnen.
I can gladly start.
Die Frage der Einschätzung
The
bestimmter
question as to how one
ist ja
assesses
jetzt
the effectiveness of
ausgetauscht worden.
certain
Der
measures
amerikanische
has
Präsident
been
hat noch keine
actually
Entscheidung
dealt with. The
getroffen.
President
Wichtig
has
für
not
mich in
yet
diesen
made a
Tagen
decision.
ist,
As he
wir
said,
stehen
what's
total
important for me
zusammen,
is that we
was
stand
die Frage
very
eines
closely
neuen
together on
Anlaufs
the
diplomatischer
question of
anbelangt. Wir
a new,
halten uns
renewed
informiert, wir
diplomatic
sind in
effort.
engem
We
Kontakt
keep each other
und,
informed, we
niemand
are
wünscht sich
in
mehr
close
den
touch,
Erfolg, als so,
and
wie wir hier
nobody
stehen.
wishes
Das
more
würde
for a
allerdings dann auch
success than
bedeuten,
the
dass
two of
wir
us who stand here
nicht
side by
nur
side.
einen
But this
Waffenstillstand haben,
would
sondern
also
auch
mean
darüber
not
hinaus
only
versuchen,
having a
bestimmte
ceasefire in
Regelungen
place,
zu
but to
treffen.
also,
Und Sie haben
over and above that,
eben gesprochen, dass der
having
russische
certain rules in
Präsident
place.
sagt,
And
es
you
muss
said
direkten
the Russian
Kontakte
president
geben. Ich will darauf
himself
hinweisen,
thinks there
diese
ought to be
direkten
direct
Kontakte
contracts. Let me
gibt
just
es
point out to you,
bereits
these
durch die
direct contracts
trilaterale
already
Kontaktgruppe
exist through the
mit
trilateral
Vertretern aus
contact
Donetsk
group
und
with
Luhansk.
representatives
Und das
from
Problem der
Donetsk and
letzten
Luhansk.
Tage
And the
und der
problem
letzten
of the last few
Zusammentreffen bestand
days
eher
and the
darin,
problem of the
dass
last meetings actually was
wenig
rather
dabei rausgekommen
more
ist,
than
wenn sie sich
that
überhaupt
there was
gesehen
not
haben und
really
dass
that
zum
much of
Teil
an end
auch
result
Vertreter aus Donetsk
if
und
they
Luhansk gar
met
nicht
at all,
eingereist sind.
or if
Für mich ist
representatives
wichtig,
from Donetsk
das
and
war ja ein
Lugansk were
Kernelement
there
des
at
Minsker
all. Sometimes they didn't
Abkommens,
even
dass
arrive. And
es
this was,
lokale
after all,
Wahlen
for
gibt
me, the
nach
core
ukrainischem
of the Minsk
Recht,
agreement,
mit
that there are
der
local
dann
elections in
Autoritäten
accordance
dort
with
in der
the
Region
Ukrainian
bestimmt werden,
constitution,
die
and that
diese
the outcome of
Regionen,
that
dafür
is
hat der
that you
ukrainische
have
Präsident
representatives,
im Grunde auch die
authorities that
Vorentscheidung
can
getroffen
speak
durch
for
das
those
spezielle
regions,
Gesetz zum
and the
Status
Ukrainian
von
president has
bestimmten
paved the
Regionen
way
in den
for this,
Oblasten Lugansk
to
und
giving
Donetsk.
certain
Und
specific
diese
status to the
Wahlen
oblasts of
sind
Lugansk
sicherlich
and
ein
Donetsk,
ganz wichtiger
and these
Punkt, um dann zu
elections
sagen,
are an
dann kann es
essential
vielleicht
point,
auch ohne
and that will then
trilaterale
enable us to say,
Kontaktgruppe
well, maybe
Kontakte geben.
now there
Und
can
das
be
ist jetzt
contacts even
Gegenstand
without
der
a
vielen
trilateral
Gespräche,
group.
die
And
wir
this is,
zu
after all,
führen
on
haben.
the agenda
Aber
of the
ich kann
many
die
talks that we
ukrainische
need
Seite
to
sehr gut
make,
verstehen,
but I
dass
can
sie
very
auf
well understand the
dem Gebiet,
Ukrainian side that
das ihre
on
territoriale
the
Integrität
territory
ausmacht,
that
auch
they
nach
consider to be
ukrainischem
part
Recht
of their
Wahlen
territory,
durchführen
and
will. Und
that
der Präsident Putin hat ja immer wieder
anything else would
betont,
violate their
dass er die
territorial
territoriale
integrity, that
Integrität
they
der
want to
Ukraine auch
actually
möchte,
see that
was
elections take
Donetsk
place
und
there,
Lugansk
and
anbelangt.
that has also
Was
been
die
stated by
Zusammenarbeit
President
insgesamt
Putin that he
anbelangt
wishes
und die
to
Frage
see those
NSA,
elections
ich
happening
glaube,
there.
da gibt
Now,
es nach
on
wie
the
vor
NSA issue, I think
unterschiedliche
there are still
Einschätzungen in
different
einigen
assessments
Fragen, aber
on
wir sehen
individual
angesichts
issues
der
there,
terroristischen
but
Bedrohung,
if we look at the
wie
sheer
eng
dimension
wir
of the terrorist
zusammenarbeiten
threat,
müssen. Und
we are
ehrlich
more
gesagt,
than
ich
aware of
als
the fact
deutsche
that we need to work
Bundeskanzlerin
together very closely, and
möchte
I, as
sagen,
German
dass
Chancellor,
die
want to state here
Institutionen
very
der
clearly
Vereinigten
that the
Staaten von
institutions of the
Amerika uns
United
viele
States of
wichtige
America have
Informationen
provided
liefern, die
us,
etwas mit der
or
Sicherheit
still
auch
continue to
Deutschlands
provide
zu
us
tun
with a
haben.
lot of very
Diese
significant, very
Zusammenarbeit
important
möchten wir nicht
information
missen.
that
Es
also
gibt
ensure our
ansonsten
security.
über den
And we
Cyberdialog
don't
und
want to
andere
do without this. There are other
Möglichkeiten
possibilities
sicherlich
through the cyber
Notwendigkeit
dialogue,
weiter
for example,
über das
to
Verhältnis von
continue
Freiheit
to
und
talk
Datenschutz
about
zu sprechen.
the
Aber heute
sort
hat
of
für uns der
protection
Kampf
of
gegen
privacy
terroristische
versus
Bedrohungen deutlich im Vordergrund
data
gestanden.
protection and so on, and security. But this was basically, combating terrorism was basically in
With
the forefront
respect
today.
to providing lethal weapons to Ukraine, it's important to point out that we have been providing assistance to the Ukrainian military generally. That's been part of a long-standing relationship between NATO and Ukraine. And our goal has not been for Ukraine to be equipped to carry on offensive operations, but to simply defend itself. And President Poroshenko has been very clear. He's not interested in escalating violence. He is interested in having his country's boundaries respected by its neighbor. So there's not going to be any specific point at which I say, clearly lethal defensive weapons would be appropriate here. It is our ongoing analysis of what can we do to dissuade Russia from encroaching further and further on Ukrainian territory. Our hope is that that's done through diplomatic means. And I just want to emphasize here once again, for the benefit not just of the American people, but for the German people, we are not looking for Russia to fail. We are not looking for Russia to be surrounded and contained and weakened. Our preference is for a strong, prosperous, vibrant, confident Russia that can be a partner with us on a whole host of global challenges. And that's how I operated throughout my first term in office. Unfortunately, Russia has made a decision that I think is bad for them strategically, bad for Europe, bad for the world. And in the face of this aggression and these bad decisions, we can't simply try to talk them out of it. We have to show them that the world is unified in imposing a cost for this aggression. And that's what we're going to continue to do. With respect to the NSA, I'll just make this point very briefly. There's no doubt that the Snowden revelations damaged impressions of Germans with respect to the U.S. government and our intelligence cooperation. What I have done over the last year and a half is to systematically work through some of these issues to create greater transparency and to restore confidence, not just for Germans, but for our partners around the world. And we've taken some unprecedented measures, for example, to ensure that our intelligence agencies treat non-U.S. citizens in ways that are consistent with due process and their privacy concerns. It's something that I put in a presidential order and has not been ever done not only by our intelligence agencies, but I think by most intelligence agencies around the world. There are going to still be areas where we've got to work through these issues. We have to internally work through some of these issues because they're complicated, they're difficult. If we are trying to track a network that is planning to carry out attacks in New York or Berlin or Paris, and they are communicating primarily in cyberspace, and we have the capacity to stop an attack like that, but that requires us then being able to operate within that cyberspace. How do we make sure that we're able to do that, carry out those functions, while still meeting our core principles of respecting the privacy of all our people? And given Germany's history, I recognize the sensitivities around this issue. What I would ask would be that the German people recognize that the United States has always been on the forefront of trying to promote civil liberties, that we have traditions of due process that we respect, that we have been a consistent partner of yours in the course of the last 70 years and certainly the last 25 years in reinforcing the values that we share. And so occasionally I would like the German people to give us the benefit of the doubt, given our history, as opposed to assuming the worst, assuming that we have been consistently your strong partners and that we share a common set of values. And if we have that fundamental underlying trust, there are going to be times where there are disagreements and both sides may make mistakes, and there are going to be irritants like there are between friends, but the underlying foundation for the relationship remains sound. Christy Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Iran nuclear negotiators have now missed 2 deadlines. Should the upcoming March deadline for talks be the final one? And what are the circumstances in which you think it would be wise to extend those talks? Also, sir, some have suggested that you are outraged by the Israeli Prime Minister's decision to address Congress. Is that so? And how would you advise Democrats who are considering a boycott?
First of all, we understood, I think, from the start when we set up the interim agreement with Iran that it would take some time to work through incredibly complex issues and a huge trust deficit between the United States and Iran, and the world in Iran, when it comes to their nuclear program. So I think there was always the assumption that although the interim agreement lasted a certain period of time, that we would probably need more time to move forward. The good news is that there have been very serious discussions. That time has been well spent. During this period of time, issues have been clarified, gaps have been narrowed, the Iranians have abided by the agreement. So this is not a circumstance in which, by talking, they've been stalling and meanwhile advancing their program. To the contrary, what we know is the program has not only been frozen, but with respect to, for example, 20% enriched uranium, they've reversed it. And so we're in a better position than we were before the interim program was set up. Having said all that, the issues now are sufficiently narrowed and sufficiently clarified where we're at a point where they need to make a decision. We are presenting to them in a unified fashion the P5+1, supported by a coalition of countries around the world, are presenting to them a deal that allows them to have peaceful nuclear power, but gives us the absolute assurance that is verifiable that they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon. And if, in fact, what they claim is true, which is they have no aspiration to get a nuclear weapon, that, in fact, according to their supreme leader, it would be contrary to their faith to obtain a nuclear weapon. If that is true, there should be the possibility of getting a deal. They should be able to get to yes. But we don't know if that's going to happen. They have their hardliners. They have their politics. And the point, I guess, is, Christy, at this juncture, I don't see a further extension being useful if they have not agreed to the basic formulation and the bottom line that the world requires to have confidence that they're not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Now, if the framework for a deal is done, if people have a clear sense of what is required, and there's some drafting and T's to cross and I's to dot, that's a different issue. But my view, and I've presented this to members of Congress, is that we now know enough that the issues are no longer technical. The issues now are, does Iran have the political will and the desire to get a deal done? And we could not be doing this were it not for the incredible cohesion and unity that's been shown by Germany, by the other members of the P5+1, which I should acknowledge includes Russia. I mean, this is an area where they've actually served a constructive role, and China's served a constructive role, and there has been no cracks in this on the P5+1 side of the table. And I think that's a testament to the degree to which we are acting reasonably in trying to actually solve a problem. With respect to Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I've said before, I talk to him all the time. Our teams constantly coordinate. We have a practice of not meeting with leaders right before their elections, 2 weeks before their elections. As much as I love Angela, if she was 2 weeks away from an election, she probably would not have received an invitation to the White House. And I suspect she wouldn't have asked for one. So, you know, this is just, you know, some of this just has to do with how we do business. And I think it's important for us to maintain these protocols, because the U.S.-Israeli relationship is not about a particular party. This isn't a relationship founded on affinity between the Labor Party and the Democratic Party, or Likud and the Republican Party. This is the U.S.-Israeli relationship that extends beyond parties and has to do with that unbreakable bond that we feel and our commitment to Israel's security and the shared values that we have. And the way to preserve that is to make sure that it doesn't get clouded with what could be perceived as partisan politics. Whether that's accurate or not, that is a potential perception, and that's something that we have to guard against. Now, I don't want to be coy. The Prime Minister and I have a very real difference around Iran sanctions. I have been very clear, and Angela agrees with me, and David Cameron agrees with me, and the others who are a member of the negotiations agree, that it does not make sense to sour the negotiations a month or two before they're about to be completed. And we should play that out. If, in fact, we can get a deal, then we should embrace that. If we can't get a deal, then we'll have to make a set of decisions. And as I've said to Congress, I'll be the first one to work with them to apply even stronger measures against Iran. But what's the rush? Unless your view is that it's not possible to get a deal with Iran, and it shouldn't even be tested. And that I cannot agree with, because as the President of the United States, I'm looking at what the options are if we don't get a diplomatic resolution. And those options are narrow and they're not attractive. And from the perspective of U.S. interests, and I believe from the perspective of Israel's interests, although I can't speak for, obviously, the Israeli government, it is far better if we can get a diplomatic solution. So there are real differences substantively, but that's separate and apart from the whole issue of Mr. Netanyahu coming to Washington. All right?
Herr Soric, ja.
Mr. Storage, please. Ms. Merkel, you just said the question is what will be effective in the Ukrainian crisis, and diplomacy, as you said yourself, has not really made all that, has not really brought about that much of a progress. Can you understand the impatience of the Americans when they say we ought to now deliver weapons? And what makes you feel confident that diplomacy will carry the day in the next few days and weeks? And on Greece, obviously, I also have to ask you, what is your comment on the most recent comments of the Greek Prime Minister, who says, let's end those programs, and I'm going to stand by the promises I made during the election campaign. How do you envisage the further cooperation with the Greek government? And to you, Mr. President, I address the question. There's quite a lot of pressure by members of your government who say weapons should be delivered to the Ukrainians. Now, you yourself have said you want to ratchet up the cost that Putin has to bear and then make him relent and give in, maybe. And you said all options have to be on the table, so apparently also weapons. So what makes you so sure that these weapons will not only go into the hands of the irregular Ukrainian army, but will then also perhaps get into the hands of separatists, of militias on the Ukrainian side, who are accused by Amnesty International and other NGOs of having violated human rights? Thank you. Whenever you have political conflict, such as the one that we have now between Russia and Ukraine, but also in many other conflicts around the world, it has always proved to be right to try again and again to solve such a conflict. We've spoken at some length about the Iranian conflict. Here too, we are expected to try time and again, and there's always a point where you say, well, all of the options are on the table, we've gone back and forth, but then one has to think again. Looking just at the Middle East conflict, for example, how many people have tried to bring about a solution to this conflict, and I've welcomed it every time, and I'm going to participate and support it every time, because I think every time it has been well worth the effort. Now, when you have a situation now where every night you see people dying, you see civilian casualties, you see the dire conditions under which people live, it is incumbent upon us as politicians. We owe it to the people to explore every avenue until somebody gives in. But we've grown up under conditions, I have to point this again, where we said nobody would have dreamt of German unity. The people who have said in West Germany, remember, they said, well, should we keep up citizenship of Germany for the GDR? They've been criticized by people who, as some who harbor revanchist ideas. And then think of President Reagan when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, standing in front of the Brandenburg Gate. Many people said at the time, how can he possibly say that? But it was right. We have no guarantee. I cannot give you a guarantee for the outcome of the Wednesday talks or for other talks. And maybe nothing will come out of it, but then we're called upon again to think about a new possibility. And since we thought about every step of the way, will this be effective or not, we will continue to do so. A lot of things have to be thought about, and I'm very glad that with the American president, I have always been able to put all of the cards on the table and discuss the pros and cons. In my speech in Munich, I gave you clearly where I stand, but we'll continue to try it. I think that's why we are politicians. That's why we chose this profession. Others have to do other things. Researchers have to all of the time find new things to explore, and people have to, and we have to see that the well-being, the prosperity of our people is ensured. But we never have a guarantee that the policies we adopt will work, will have the effect. Oh, sorry, Greece. I almost forgot. Yes. On Wednesday, there's going to be a Eurogroup meeting, and I think what counts is what Greece will put on the table at that Eurogroup meeting or perhaps a few days later. The German policy ever since 2010 has been aimed at Greece staying a member of the Eurozone. I've said this time and again. The basic rules have always been the same. You put in your own efforts, and on the other side you're being shown solidarity as a quid pro quo. The three institutions of the Troika, the ECB, the European Union Commission and the IMF have agreed on programs. These programs are the basis of any discussion we have. I've always said I will wait for Greece to come with a sustainable proposal, and then we'll talk about this.
The point Angela made, I think, is right, which is we never have guarantees that any particular course of action works. As I've said before, by the time a decision reaches my desk, by definition, it's a hard problem with no easy answers. Otherwise, somebody else would have solved it, and I would never even hear about it. The issue that you raised about can we be certain that any lethal aid that we provide Ukraine is used properly, doesn't fall into the wrong hands, does not lead to over-aggressive actions that can't be sustained by the Ukrainians? What kinds of reactions does it prompt, not simply from the separatists, but from the Russians? Those are all issues that have to be considered. The measure by which I make these decisions is it more likely to be effective than not? And that is what what our deliberations will be about. But what I do know is this, that the United States and Europe have not stood idly by. We have made enormous efforts, enormous investments of dollars, of political capital, of diplomacy in trying to resolve this situation. I think the Ukrainian people can feel confident that we have stood by them. People like Vice President Biden and Secretary of State Kerry have spent countless hours on this issue, as has Angela and her team on the German side. And just because we have not yet gotten the outcome that we want doesn't mean that this pressure is not over time making a difference. I think it's fair to say that there are those inside of Russia who recognize this has been a disastrous course for the Russian economy. I think Mr. Putin is factoring that in. But understandably, until the situation is entirely resolved, we're going to have to keep on trying different things to see if we can get a better outcome. What I do know is that we will not be able to succeed unless we maintain the strong transatlantic solidarity that's been the hallmark of our national security throughout the last 70 years. And I'm confident that I've got a great partner in Angela in maintaining that. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please leave your headsets on the seats, please? Ladies and gentlemen, will you please leave your headsets on the seats? Thank you.